Okay. So basically, this is one question, which is, was there a time in your life or moment in your life where you realized teaching is in my future?
Yeah. So
So let's start. Are you recording?
I am recording.
Okay. And what happens is I'll ask supplemental questions, and sometimes Jacob will come in with a student perspective because his interest is in teaching as well. So
okay.
it's kind of he's like the Padawan learner. Anyway, so that's the question, and all I would have you do is just start by introducing yourself and who you are and what you do,
Okay.
and then I'll start with a question, and we'll go from there.
So my name is Omiyemi Artisia Green. I'm the director of the program in Africana Studies. I'm also an associate professor of theater and Africana Studies at Mary. And I did not always want to teach. Initially, I came to William & Mary with the thought that I would attend law school, specifically that I would attend Marshall with. And as a freshman, I rotated around 2, maybe 3 different freshman seminars. In one semester, the third one I landed upon was African American Theater History and Performance.
So you came in for law school.
Mm-hmm. It was a dream I had ever since I was 10. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a prosecutor. I had a real focused goal for most of my preteen and certainly pre-college life.
Wow. And then, but what was that time like where you discovered, oh, I want to do this?
So even after taking the freshman seminar in African American Theater History and Performance, I still wasn't settled that I wanted to teach, but my interests definitely widened. What inspired me so much about that course was that I was able to see myself at the center of scholarship in a way I'd never seen before. And I had been introduced to new dramatic works that I had never read before, new artists, and a new way of seeing myself in the visual and performing arts. And so it was after that course, I then became involved in the African American Theater Club, took some more theater courses, decided I was going to major in psychology because I wanted to understand people and behavior and motivation, but still really interested in theater. And it was probably my senior year that I decided I wanted to teach. And so I stayed at William & Mary a 5th year, took some more theater classes, and then as a way to prepare myself for graduate school.
Was it theater, when you took the theater classes, were you more into performing or writing or directing or producing? What was the focus then?
For sure, it was directing. I definitely see myself behind the camera or behind the directing table, watching what's unfolding in front of me. But I was really interested also in just dramatic literature, period, in the process of analyzing a text, which later became for me the process of dramaturgy, which wasn't introduced to me as an undergraduate in that way. It became an aspect of the work that I picked up as an educational associate at Theater 4 when I was doing an internship while I was in graduate school.
Did you have any professors or mentors that meant a lot to you during that period of time?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the professors, actually both of the professors that inspired me the most are no longer here. One was Yasmin Lambert, who taught courses in theater history and multicultural theater, and another was Susan Chast, who also taught courses in theater history, but also feminist theater history. She was also one of the co-instructors of the African American Theater History and Performance course.
What did they bring to you? What was that gift or that encouragement that helped you to find your own path?
So I think you used a word that I'm going to borrow, and you said encouragement. And Professor Chast was white. The department was largely made up of white faculty and white majors and minors. But most of the students that took that class were of color. And so Professor Chast encouraged our participation intellectually and creatively in a department that hadn't yet quite made intellectual and creative strides in the way that we're making now, right? So they showed us, that we had a space there, that there was this culture of belonging and value that we most appreciated. Certainly, I appreciated for sure. Additionally, she gave us an intellectual language for evaluating texts in a way that I hadn't experienced yet. I had been given a copy of Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls when I was probably 13. My grandmother gave it to me and said that she had been in some conversation with some of her peers, and they said, this is a play that your granddaughter needs to read. And I was like, okay. So I read it and was like, I'm not quite sure why they felt I needed to read that. But when I took the course with Professor Chast and also Professor Petersen, who was co-instructing the course at the time, the way they were able to break that text down to us in ways that made it so personal, so relevant, and gave us a critical acumen, made me understand more why my grandmother had given me that text. And I would say that the choreo poem, and For Colored Girls specifically, certainly were inspiring factors that made me want to study more the art form that is Black theater, made me want to direct more, also inspired me to write. Because I would say that the choreo poem certainly inspired the piece that you and I are working on together right now, Roy, Dance of the Orcas, which I term a choreo ritual because I'm very much interested in the way that movement and text and music all work together or converge upon individuals in a ritualistic way that help them express themselves and express parts of themselves that they've kept hidden and repressed.
Because you have mentioned to me that you're a priest, that you have a spirituality. Did your spirituality come from your study?
Yeah. So, the more I dig into what we call Black theater, some years later, this is beyond graduate school, I've read a play called Crowns by Regina Taylor. And in this play, she introduces us to the Orisha by way of the women who gather collectively on behalf of this young girl who has lost her sense of self. And I had never heard of these Orisha before then. So here's where dramaturgy comes into play because, I'm studying all of the regional theater production study guides for the production, which then sends me into academic texts because, of course, we're academics, so we want to see what's out there. It sends me into community events, dance classes. I'm meeting people then who are studying the practice. And it's probably, so let's see, this is around 2004, 2007. I then direct the production. I actually directed twice. And then around 2012, so I've met people, I've taken dance classes, I'm getting involved in the music, I'm doing all this reading, and then my grandmother, the same one who gave me the copy of Colored Girls, she died. And I remember while we were preparing for her funeral, I prayed, and I was praying specifically to her because my cousin asked me to say a few words at the funeral. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to say, that would honor my grandmother and both inspire and encourage those who had gathered, to remember her. And I remember praying to her, and I said, Grandmother, I need you to show me the community because it's a practice that you have to be actively engaged in. It's not one that you can kind of sit on the sidelines and do a lot of reading about only to get the best understanding. And so we get through the funeral. Shortly thereafter, I'm at an ancestral remembrance tribute. It's a public event at Buckrow Beach, in part sponsored by the city of Hampton. And after the tribute, we've all offered our fruit and flowers and prayers to the water in remembrance of, those who perished in the transatlantic slave trade. And I was walking away from the water towards the boardwalk, and I could hear my grandmother saying, "Look at the people standing over there in white." Now, almost everybody there that day had on white, but she was directing me to a specific group of people that had congregated. And I went over. I made introductions, all of whom actually were priests in the tradition of Isheshe Lagba. And from there, I participated in what they called an ancestral veneration workshop, where they're talking to you about how to properly honor and venerate your ancestors. And then from there, I got divination and made a relationship with one of the priests who happened to be a priest of Oshun. And my study deepened because at one of the divinations I received, it was said that, I needed to initiate into this practice. And the diviner, through their divination tools, were able to tell me things about myself that I knew I hadn't shared with them and anybody else. That was confirmation for me that this was a way for me to go deeper into the recesses of myself. And so I did. And that was by this time it's 2013. So I've been actively practicing Isheshe Lagba here in the diaspora since 2013.
And was your writing born from that, or was your writing before that? Does the writing take part in your spirituality?
So I was writing before that, but now that you ask me that question, I think the writing was preparing me for the practice, for sure, preparing me for my work in ritual, for sure. And then as my study in Isheshe Lagba deepened, I began to combine the two. So it wasn't just lived experience. It wasn't just creative experience. It also became in part academic, because I'm using parts of the tradition as a theory for teaching students about evaluating dramatic literature, and how to evaluate characterization in ways that make the work ritualistic and therefore beneficial for not only those who participate in it, but observe and witness the work.
When we were filming Dance of the Orcas, which is your script, and you've directed it on stage, I felt like, oh wow, we are becoming a part of this ritual in a sense, which I loved. I just thought, wow, this is deeper than I could imagine. Yeah. Have you written more? I mean, I know Dance of the Orcas. What other plays have you written?
Yeah. So the other work is Me to the Seventh Power. It was it wasn't the first play. The first play I actually wrote was about Sojourner Truth. At the time I was working for Theater 4 as an educational associate. And so that was actually my first published and produced script. The next play was Me to the Seventh Power, and it was actually therapeutic. I was young. I was a single mother at the time in grad school. So I'm raising a baby, trying to get an advanced degree because I'm confident now that I want to teach. And so I'm going through that process. But also, I'm a young adult still trying to figure out who I am outside of this new role that I've acquired. And I was thinking about my relationship with my parents and thinking about my relationship with my partner, thinking about my role as a mother and as an artist. And I realized that I had 7 different aspects of myself that were kind of showing up in different arenas. And so I call the play Me to the Seventh Power, because in that play, I examine by way of monologues and movement and music these different identities and how they all converge and how they're all very different. That was produced by Chicago State University Theater, where I worked prior to coming to William & Mary. And I put the work away after I saw it in production, because I realized I just simply needed to write and to see it told by someone else as a way to process stuff that I hadn't yet processed for myself, right? So it was therapeutic for me, and I don't think it's ever something I need to return to again. With Dance of the Orcas, which would be the third play that I've written, I wanted this work to certainly begin with me, but I wanted to offer it to the world. And I wanted it to be the kind of thing that could travel from group to group or community to community, wherever it needed to go. And those in that community or those in that group would then collaborate to produce the work, so that whoever the Tahlequah was in that moment could process whatever they needed to process. So, for example, when we did it for this current iteration as a film, one of the things I said in the announcement, the audition announcement, was that I wanted these trained actors, I wanted to work with an actor who had something to say, but they hadn't said it yet. They hadn't expressed it to anyone. They've been walking around holding it. And I had one student. Now, interestingly enough, the one student that came to audition was a student that had expressed participating in the work before, when we did it for the Association for the Study of the African Worldwide Diaspora Conference in 2019. But her schedule didn't permit her involvement at that time. And so I said, I think a time will come in the future when you'll be able to participate, and here we are. And she said it was the right time. She was really clear about what she needed to say. I said, you don't need to discuss that with me. There's going to be opportunities as we develop the work and film it where you can write it out. And through the ritualistic processes that Tahlequah goes through as a part of the work, you're going to be able to process that stuff for yourself and let it go and release.
She was the perfect person
Yes.
for it. You could not have found a better Tahlequah. Just really well done. And you hit it on that.
Couldn't make it up.
Yeah. Well, that for me gave me understanding of the spiritual dimension of the project.
Yeah.
When I saw that happen, I was like, okay. I just want to wind back. So if you grew up thinking you were going to be a lawyer or a prosecutor, and then you become this writer, director, professor,
Dramaturg.
how? Yeah, and also your grandmother seems to be the mentor of your life in the sense that she gave you the book, she encouraged you, she spoke to you about the priesthood and the priests. So the two questions. One is, how did you as a focused on being a lawyer, what's the lawyer in you say now?
You know, I'm not going to say that I regret anything, right? Because, you know, the destiny was chosen, and I'm choosing to honor it for sure. The only time I think about the decision I made sometimes is about the money. Right? I'm like, oh, I could be making a lot more money right now. You know, but I'm still law adjacent. You know, I've got a friend who's also an actress who's high up in the law, and that's all I'm going to say on that.
So it's still a possibility.
It's, you know, I'm connected. I'll just put it that way, in a different way. But I talked about wanting to be a prosecutor, but there's also within me a spirit of advocacy, and definitely one who appreciates structure and changes in policy for sure. And those things are all very much tied to the law, so to speak. And I see that showing up in my work, certainly as an administrator of Africana Studies. I mean, I've been in other administrative capacities outside of that. I do a lot of advocacy.
Does it show up in your teaching?
I was just about to say, this bit about advocacy, I think definitely shows up in my teaching for sure. I was hired as the African American theater historian, but I don't think initially my colleagues fully knew or understood, or maybe even some appreciate what they were asking me to do and do in this space, right, which is really transgressive. I came in at a time when there was just the one course, which I had taken as a freshman. It hadn't quite been taught in some time. So they knew that there was a need, but everybody wasn't ready. That's probably the best way for me to put it, faculty and or students, right? So I had to advocate on why it was necessary. And there's been a lot of advocacy for my teaching and for the kind of work that I do since then. We're getting there for sure. And I appreciate the struggle, of course, because I grow. William and Mary made me grow. Oh, gosh. William and Mary definitely made me grow. But I've had to advocate for, many students over my 11 years here at William and Mary, and to teach them how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm still connected to the law. It's
still
showing
very
up
much,
differently.
yeah, it's still very much a part of you.
For sure.
Even though the title isn't there,
No.
it's still very much part of who you, one of the dimensions of you. Or, Jacob, do you have anything come to mind that you want to ask?
Oh man, I was thinking when you were talking earlier about how like your writing process turned into directing.
Yeah.
It was making me think about some experiences I had in a theater in high school where I was often a stage manager. So I had this very like sort of organizational role, and I was trying to keep everything together. And one of the most organic aspects of each production would be the dramaturgy part, where usually it was another student would volunteer to do some research, some deeper research about what the themes of the play were, or like how we could sort of connect our community to what the message might turn into, And it was always, sometimes it was difficult for me to let that process be so organic, but it also turned into one of the most productive aspects of the production, and it turned into a way for us to really get something out of it beyond the sort of just excitement of doing a production.
Yep.
And so I was going to ask you like how you approach that in your own work, especially when you've written the show. I'm sure there's so much emotional connection to the message, maybe as you would tell it, and to express that to your actors. And but then you were talking about how you were looking for someone who had their own message to tell, and that just got me thinking about how beautiful that is, like from a dramaturg's perspective, to let the message maybe not change, but to sort of morph and evolve based on who's telling it.
For sure.
So I don't know if you have anything else to say about how you approach that process, or like how you sort of structure it for your, I don't know if you could call them your students or your coworkers or your whoever it is who you're working with to tell the story. Like how does that process look like when you first sit down? You're like, okay, I would really like to do this with you. Here's something that I've written, and like, how do you make it a communal story?
So with Dance of the Orcas, I always start the conversation with how the play came to be. I'm transparent in the fact that I was navigating some health challenges. I'm transparent in the fact that I'm aware that those health challenges had emotional and spiritual roots that I hadn't untethered, pulled up yet. And I'm transparent in the fact that I wrote to process that work. I'm transparent in the priesthood to let them know that this is indeed a ritual, right? for purposes of efficaciousness and personal evolution. And so every time I see it, so this will be the second time that I've seen it, because the first time that I did it in 2019, people watching me watch the work in production could tell I was still processing for myself. And so I began that process with the excerpt that you were hoping I would somehow do on screen for the iteration of this performance, right, to give rationale. And then literally I was sitting on stage, but in front of the performers as a priest of Yemoja, bringing in that element in the work, like physically, right? So I have those discussions with the actors who are all involved in the work. But then I say there's this moment in the work where Tahlequah has to write out. She does a fair amount of writing in this piece, either writing things in the sand or writing things on this paper that is water soluble. And what will be the process, and what was certainly the process for us here with the film, was to have Tahlequah write out the things that she hadn't said, that she wanted to begin the process of releasing, and then to take that actual note, and she passes it over to the water energy, who then throws that into the water, and she watches it herself begin to dissipate. Now, it's not enough to just write it and then throw it away. That's one of the ways that one can kind of process some things that they have yet untethered themselves from. But there still is the need to, to purge it vocally. In the process of the play, that purging is done through a scream rather than having her articulate, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. All of that converges upon itself, meets here in her throat, and she releases it as a scream. But I'm transparent in that that's what needs to happen in this process. And so I will say that when I was working with students on the 2019 production, we really quickly realized that everybody in the production was suffering from the same concern, and that was all of the stuff that they hadn't articulated. It just wasn't Tahlequah. It was Eshu. It was Yemoja. It was the wise women. So we spent a lot of rehearsal time staging the work for sure, but also holding space for one another and holding each other literally. Sometimes we had to stop rehearsal and let the tears flow and hold literally, yes, faculty holding students, students holding students, because stuff was coming up. And we couldn't let people leave the rehearsal space with all of that unprocessed, raw emotion and just send them back to their dorm room. Like, that was unconscionable to me. And so I very quickly realized, not just in Dance of the Orcas for sure, but in a lot of the work that I do, how important it's going to be for us to have, as part of our production team, the requisite staff who are trained in other ways to help us deal with the stuff that comes up from the people who participate in the process. Because again, it is a ritual, and it is meant to help people feel whole and healthy and happy and joyful. But we got to get there, right? And the process of this play and this, what has become this film, I mean, it does start from a painful place. And so in order to get there, we need all the right people in the space. It can't just be about how do we get this work up on its feet, or how do we get, translate this from what was live to a film. So even in the midst of what was happening at the beach, and all of Roy's genius and all of Mike's genius, in my head, some of those times, I was somewhere else, because I knew that Tahlequah and the student performing in that role was going somewhere else.
Interesting. Yes. Yes.
Part of me wants to go, of course. Like, yes,
Well-
that seems so simple. Like, of course, it's a process, and it's more than a production. It's a way for everyone involved to experience something and to process something together. But then on the other hand, like that is so radical from a play like production perspective. Like, I wouldn't want to call Tahlequah's writings a prop. That's more than a property. Like that doesn't belong on the prop table. That's something to really be protected and to be held as the important like text that it is.
Yep.
Yeah, I think from a filming perspective, I see a lot of that. You don't know from the film crew perspective how we all came together, but how we came together like that, I don't know. But this was 20 years of a lot of stuff in me as a director. After we filmed, I had a 3-day where I could not sleep. I was so happy, like just joy of, and I don't even think that I certainly wasn't the only director at that beach. I saw it as definitely it became a co-directing thing, which I will gladly celebrate. But I think that it really was for me like a therapeutic process that I didn't even know I was in until afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful experience. And I learned so much. Yes, I learned in terms of directing, I kind of it was everybody's participation.
Right.
But there was something more going on, and I'm discovering what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for, for you as a writer-director to trust a film crew with your work, that is a major thing. I've been on things where I've written and the director's not getting it, and I'm like, okay. But, so on several levels, it was a beautiful project on the spiritual level as well. And I guess the process will continue in the editing as to how that's
sure.
happen. But I appreciated your artistry and your writing and your ability to collaborate without ego, but with a purpose in it, of a spiritual growth and release for the people involved in the project.
Yeah, it's definitely bigger than me. And the other thing I think that allowed me to be freer and so collaborative, of course, is because I was also working in a medium that is really new for me. This is not a filmed live production like one of our shows, Gem of the Ocean, which was the last play to close the William and Mary season pre-COVID. We filmed that, but it was live. Everybody performed on stage with no consideration for the camera. We had a couple of different cameras. This is just it.
It was coverage. I know almost a documentary on it, just a live.
Just so we have an archive copy. When I had to translate what we did with Dance of the Orcas in 2019 into some semblance of a film script
that we could do in 2 days.
that we can do in 2 days, in less than 12 hours each day, I really quickly realized, this girl, you are in new waters here completely. And so what is essential to distill from the story, that's what I need you to focus on here, Omiyemi. And I already knew that the work was going to keep evolving and take a new form. And I trusted that the folks who would support the journey and the new form that it's taking would show up. And they did.
Yeah, we did. We all did. So cool. Wonderful. Let me just bring it back to your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
So what, in reflection, what else has she brought you? Like, do you still feel you have like relationship there with
Yeah.
is that still a part of your belief and your heart? And what has she brought you?
Yeah. So, even though and so the grandmother that I've been speaking about primarily is my maternal grandmother, but I would be remiss if I had not said also that my paternal grandmother, both of them were active in my shaping. My paternal grandmother was with me in the first days of what motherhood became like, helping me like learn to take care of an infant. I'd never done that before. And it was the only time that I can recall, because she had multiple grandchildren, where I had her to myself, for an extended period of time. Both of them are still very much with me. Whenever I want to glean some ancestral wisdom, they're the two I think of first, right? Because I knew them well while they were living. They have seen me through, most recently, what would be a very difficult experience, where one of them reminded me of the importance of my voice. And that's kind of why we get into that little bit of section about voice and articulation of things in Dance of the Orcas, for sure. Let your work be a testament of who you are at your core, and do not compromise for anyone. And I had to be reminded of that here recently, even at 43, when you think you have it all figured out, your grandmothers come in to remind you, no, you still need some growth here. Because I believe in the ancestral presence, they have traveled with me all over the world. When I went to Abeokuta, Nigeria, for my own initiation into the priesthood, they were with me there. I was really, really far away from home, and not everyone knew what I was going to do. There was the research aspect of it, for sure, but then there was this other initiatory aspect too, which is what we call awo in the tradition. It's not something that you discuss. And so they were there, as a protective force, for sure. I was with people that I knew, loved, and trusted, but I was still away from the comforts of home in a new land, learning a new thing. I find myself sometimes engaged in practices that I know are definitely grandmotherly ancestral, like my love for fish and cooking it. I'll get a taste for, fish and grits and okra. And that's something that my grandmother would make for me, or neck bones and, noodles, egg noodles. And it's my other grandmother. I have some mannerisms that I've definitely inherited from my maternal grandmother, for sure. And so I know that, their teachings and their investment in my life, it continues to show up, certainly. It continues to show up in the way that I mother my own children. I think it shows up in the way that I care for my students, because I'm never just teaching the subject matter to them. I'm never just teaching the subject matter to them. It's never just the subject matter, because I'm only going to have them, if I'm lucky enough to get them as a freshman. Many of them repeat courses with me, but I only have them for 4 years. And I know that when I first meet them. So I'm always trying to prepare them for what life is going to be like when they leave William and Mary, because this is just such a brief moment in the landscape and continuum of their entire life. So I want our engagement to be meaningful, and I want our engagement to be, as much as I can pour into them in the 15, 16 weeks that I have them, and perhaps repetitively, or even if we're working on a production, I want to give them tools. I want to give them wisdom that they can then turn back to. So even if I'm only inspiring them through the content itself, I'm really interested in preparing them for navigating what this life is going to be like when they leave you know, this triangular campus, you know, that sits between Richmond Road and Jamestown Road.
I just want to say I saw that aspect of your teaching on this project, so that was an honor to watch and to participate in that way, to see it. So yes, definitely. And thank you for sharing your journey with us,
Yeah,
here.
for sure. Thank you for this invitation to just talk unscripted, informally about some things that I care about.
Yep.
For sure.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.